Muses of Mythology is a spoiler-heavy podcast.
That's an understatement.
We're going to discuss not just the events of this book, but the Riordan as a whole, and really anything that we feel is relevant. You can find full spoiler warnings in the show notes. This is Story 98, Fenrir. I'm your
Not Fenrir, Thor.
It is Thor, and I just read what was written. Welcome to Muses of Mythology, a podcast where we explore how ancient myths become part of modern pop culture through the lens of Riordan's Magnus Chase and the gods of Asgard. This is Story 98, Thor. I'm your co-host and podcasting muse, Darien and Smartt. Joining me is my co-host and brother, DJ.
How's everybody doing today? I'm DJ the Muse, and I've been playing a lot of Marvel Rivals today.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not been the most pleasant time.
No.
But I've been having fun.
He insists he's having fun, despite all evidence to the contrary.
Yeah, it's competitive games.
Well,
It's just how it goes.
Let's think
Try not
about
to play them here as much as I used to.
And for that, as someone whose room is across the hall from yours, I appreciate.
Yep.
Shall we muse about this in the garden for a moment?
Absolutely.
Hey, DJ.
What's up?
We have a new returning patron.
That's right, we do.
Shout out to friend of the show, Charlie, also co-host of the Eldest Gods podcast.
Yep.
For rejoining the Patreon, specifically to hang out for Musemas.
Musemas is a wonderful time of year. We've just wrapped it up at time of recording.
And I'm distinctly sad about that fact. I was just saying when we started.
It was a fantastic year. We are so glad that we got to do all the ones that we chose this year.
Mm-hmm.
They were shockingly good.
Very good.
Above average in terms of how I felt the last year.
Yes, I think so too. And also just shout out for Charlie for, I feel like, validating Musemas as a continuing thing we do. We appreciate that so much.
Absolutely.
And we liked it so much we did an extra episode. We did 13 episodes of Musemas this year.
I know. Thank you guys so much for joining us for that.
So yeah, we appreciate it. Shout out to Charlie. Shout out to all of our patrons for making our year merry and bright all year long.
Absolutely. And if you'd want to go there and listen to yourself, it's patreon.com/Muses of Mythology.
You can enjoy this year's Museses as well as the 2 prior Museses, and honestly, all the other bonus episodes. Goodness me, there's a lot of them.
There. Thank you guys for joining us, and now back to the show.
DJ, it's a big one.
It's Thor.
It's perhaps the big one in terms of Norse mythology.
That's what everybody knows.
I think you would be hard pressed to find an individual who is not familiar with Thor in some capacity. And yes, that is largely thanks to the Marvel Cinematic Universe these days. But in terms of Norse mythology and belief, Thor has always been a big deal.
Yeah.
This episode is what I think I'm calling Thor's family. The Thor family, mayhaps. Because I'm folding in a lot of facets of Thor. The Thor sons. So, a few of them, actually. But before we get into that, DJ, what do you remember about Thor from the Magnus Chase books?
He's a redhead. He's very gruff. He's built like a brick shithouse. Mm-hmm. He's got gauntlets that help him lift Mjolnir. He is addicted to streaming shows. He has a wife who he calls his trophy wife because she makes trophies. He has goats that he kills every night, making sure not to break their bones because he does care about them to a degree. That's pretty much all I got. He lost the Mjolnir. Mm-hmm. They found it later.
Yep. That was a whole plot.
The whole book.
The second book. The whole plot of the second book is the Hammer of Thor.
Yep. That's kind of all I got. He runs. He runs.
He
runs 10,000 miles in one day.
But he forgot to turn on the pedometer, so he has to do it all again.
Yeah. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. So Thor first shows up in the first Magnus Chase book towards the end in the Sword of Summer.
Yep.
We are first introduced to his goats, who are so very sad about their lot in life.
Quite depressed. One of them specifically.
Mm-hmm. It's Marvin and... You're right. I think one of them is just like, this is whatever, and the other one is distinctly like going through it.
Yeah.
We call them Marvin and Otis.
Yep.
Because even the English translation of their names, Tooth Gnasher and Tooth Grinder, is just a lot. So I
too much.
I support Riordan's choice in this one. Yeah, that's largely it. We encounter Thor. He is being drowned by a giantess who's just like spraying a river at him.
Through her legs.
We have covered this actual myth from the Eddas.
Yep, this actual myth is she's pissing.
Yep. It is not what a friend of the show, Robert Gamer, would call part of Rick's piss era. No. That would come later as the Trials of Apollo books started to come out.
Yep.
So also I wonder if an editor was like, no, you cannot. You are not allowed to put that.
There's too much piss for one screen.
No. Okay, moving away from it. The Thor we meet is very single-minded.
Yep.
He appreciates them helping, the assistance they provided, and is like, you're here to do a quest for me, because that's what heroes do. They do quests for me. In another example of a real intense conflation of Greek and Nordic belief practices.
The Norse. Thor was doing everything. He just was doing it. He was the hero doing the quest.
All the things. Yeah, it's Thor. Thor isn't, every time we have a story where there is an adventure, it is Thor. And the gods are involved, it is Thor. Thor is the one running around. Usually Loki is there with him. They are traveling to the different realms. They are having hijinks. They are in the shenanigans. They are on a quest. It is not. We talked about this. There aren't demigod here, and that's the thing that Rick Riordan is up against. He's like, well, now I want to do Norse. They are distinctly different in that there aren't Norse demigods.
Yeah.
Any children of Norse gods are just gods themselves, and children of either like a god or a goddess, or often like a Jotun, a giantess.
Yeah.
So there is that where we haven't covered the magician's one, or the Egyptian one yet. So did y'all, like that one, I feel like solves this
issue a little better.
Very well. It's a very different approach to the magic system. It doesn't feel like a retread of handling where this one does feel like we just slapped the
Norse,
Camp Half-Blood aesthetic over the Norse, or the Norse aesthetic over the Camp Half-Blood setup.
Yeah.
The Egyptian one is, and we'll dig into that when we finally get to them. But the more I'm getting into, like, the more we've covered the stuff where we're, like, encountering the fates and other things, and in this one, rereading this chapter where he's like, you must be here to help me. It's like, I'm not saying it's bad. It just feel like it was the most simplest solution.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily love it.
Well, when you're writing in one certain world the whole time, and you have two whole series of established rules, because at this point he also had heroes out, so he still kind of had to play with that. And when
Egypt was before this.
Well, yeah, Egypt was before, but I don't imagine that did anywhere near as well.
It is the Kane Chronicles are largely considered like, I don't know the numbers. They were still all bestsellers, but in terms of fandom popularity, but even I feel like the Magnus ones hit a point where folks didn't grab onto them as much as they did the...
Yeah, but they grabbed onto it way more than Kane.
Maybe.
Because I'm absolutely a normie when it comes to series. I still haven't even listened to Kane Chronicles.
Okay, but to be fair, you didn't listen to Kane Chronicles initially because Audible didn't have them when you were doing it all for the podcast.
But also, when they were coming out, I was reading Magnus as they were coming out, and I couldn't have given a fuck about the Kane Chronicles as they were coming out.
But why is that, you think?
I have no idea.
Interesting. That is something we'll have to examine. So, that's the thing. He talks about having these tattoos on his knuckles of Magni and Modi, who are his sons, who will serve. They're my favorites. He's like, this is embarrassing. I'm not sure. They might not even, because Magnus asks, how old are they? This is embarrassing. I'm not sure. They might not even be born yet.
Yeah, because they're just the sons that survive Ragnarok.
Yep. Also, Hearthstone is here in the conversation, and he is obviously communicating in sign language, which Thor does not understand and is just projecting whatever response he wants.
Fun.
It's just leaning into Thor is being portrayed as like very dim-witted.
Oh, yeah.
Which is not necessarily an original take on Thor when you see how he is in. He just really solves things with one direct. Like, I will hit you with my hammer until the problem is solved.
Yeah.
So, let's get into it. The thing about Thor is that he is an exceedingly ancient god. Like, a lot of these are ancient deities, right? But Thor in particular, there are a lot of deities in Europe and some as far as like Asian countries that have very similar attributes of being like a warrior sky god associated with lightning and thunder.
Mm-hmm.
To the point where there is a lot of scholars believe that there is a common ancestry essentially for these figures and what we would describe as like that Proto-Indo-European culture. And Thor is believed to have probably been like dating back to this original idea that became split as all these stories spread out. We have Roman records of Thor's worship, specifically Thor, as early as like the 1st century AD.
Nice. It's awesome.
Yeah, and we've talked about this particular record we have. This is by the Roman historian Tacitus. And he wrote in his Germania, quote, "Among the gods, Mercury is the one they principally worship. They regard it as a religious duty to offer him, on fixed days, human as well as other sacrificial victims. Hercules and Mars they appease by animal offerings of the permitted kind." Now you may have noticed I was throwing some Roman names at you.
Mm-hmm.
That's because it was common practice for Roman writers to just swap out the Roman names of deities for, swap out non-Roman names.
For Roman names.
Yes, essentially. And they'd be like, this guy's kind of like my dude, so it must actually be my guy. And I'm just going to call him by his correct name. This was called Interpretio Romana, is what this practice is. So in this case, Odin is Mercury, Tyr is Mars, and Thor is Hercules. Now, we want to skip ahead 10 centuries into the Viking era. Mm-hmm. We've got some more outside records observing the culture, and Thor was all the rage. German chronicler Adam of Bremen, who records in his Gestia Hamburgiani Genesis, Ecclesia Pontificum, he described a statue of Thor as the mightiest. Sat in a temple in a triple throne flanked by Woden and Fricko. Adam would go on to say that Thor, they reckon, rules the sky. He governs the thunder and lightning, winds and storms, fine weather and fertility. And he would say that there were priests who would offer sacrifices to Thor in times of plague or famine.
Nice.
And not to, like, I want to, like, before we get into, like, the myths and all the grander stories and stuff, like, emphasize Thor as a genuinely, like, tactile feels like a weird way to describe it, but, like, for real, how everyday important Thor was to folks. Like, there are numerous places in Sweden, Norway, and Denmark that contain the name of the Old Norse name of Thor. Like, they were naming physical places after Thor because he was so important. There are 4 runestones that exist depicting Thor's various adventures. Mm. At the beginning of the Viking era, a lot of names, like children were beginning to be named using conjugates of Thor's name. This phenomenon didn't exist in records in previous times. And so scholar Rudolf Semick has actually theorized that this became about specifically as a response at the attempts of Christianification as it started to come into the region. And you would just see the idea of holding on to Thor as pushing back against this attempt to erase these pagan beliefs. And so the essential thing I want to communicate up the top is that Thor functioned as like a protector to humanity in a way that the other deities just didn't. Yeah. Like, he fights the world serpent for a reason. The world serpent that wraps around Midgard, that threatened Midgard, like that idea of Thor being the one to come save or protect humanity comes from his role like as a warrior, but also with the idea of like thunder bringing rain, bringing fertility to the earth, and having both of these aspects of being essential to the Norse people and how they viewed their place in their cosmos. Oh, also side note, yes, Thursday does come from Thor's day, the conjugate of that. That's because the Latin, the Romans were naming all of their days of the week after their gods. It came over, and Germany just did the inverse of what the Romans did when they were taking their gods. So they just said, oh, this is Jupiter's day? This is Thor's day now. So,
fantastic.
The first account we have of Thor from the Prose Edda is very similar than the first account we have of everyone when we get into the Poetic Edda. And that's how he's going to die in Ragnarok. We've covered this a couple of times. DJ, do you remember?
Jormungandr bites him. He takes 9 steps and succumbs to his poison.
He does. He does take out Jormungandr first.
Yeah,
that is important.
He kills Jormungandr, but he takes 9 steps after that and then succumbs to Jormungandr's poison. Yep.
So I want to talk about Snorri. Just for a second.
What did he do wrong this time?
What? This episode is, I will let you know in advance, this episode will contain a lot of, and we think Snorri made this up.
Okay.
So,
wonderful.
But one thing we know for a fact Snorri made up was the idea that Thor was a prince of Troy.
That's
you
right.
recall, yeah.
Yeah, he did do that, didn't he?
Mm-hmm. He was said to be the son of Menon by Troana, who was supposed to be one of Priam's daughters, the king of Troy. And they say that Thor would go on and marry a prophetess named Sybil, who was Snorri's interpretation of Sif. Mm-hmm. And again, to try to be like, these guys weren't gods, but also anchoring them in this great Greek Western story and making them part of that tradition. Talked about that. So that's Snorri's first introduction, is in the prologue of the poetic. Oh, sorry, I did that a lot this episode. Prose Edda. Swing over to the Poetic Edda, we've got, like I said, the Volspa, Thor dying. And then the next time it rolls up, we have in Grimmir's Sayings, which is just a classic Odin's in a wisdom contest. And in this one, he mentions how Odin, in this one, talks about Thor's daily commute. Saying, Kormt and Ormt and the 2 Kerlager, these Thor must wade every day when he goes to give judgments at Yggdrasil's ash, for the Aesir bridge burns all with flames, the sacred waters boil. And I don't know if I mentioned in the Bifrost episode that this kind of indicates that Thor does not travel across the Bifrost like everyone else, or maybe no one else, because it burns everything. Like,
I have no idea. But he does in fact just swim across the ocean to get to Jotunheim too.
That's true. Do you think, is it like a breaststroke? Does he do the butterfly? Does he do a backstroke? Doggy paddle!
He's not the water god.
Yep. Well, that's true. And I just wanted to mention that because I'm like, did I mention that in the Bifrost episode? I think I did. I can't remember.
You did.
Just in case. It's wild. Now, because as we've reached towards the end of our season on Norse mythology, we have actually covered a lot of Thor stories already because they overlap with other elements.
Yeah, it's pretty much the whole Jotunheim episode was talking about what Thor was doing in Jotunheim.
Exactly. So we covered that one. We covered that time that Thor and Tyr got together to go pick up a big cauldron from Hymir, who's also the guy that Thor went on a fishing trip with, specifically to try to regain his honor with the world serpent after that incident at Utgard Loki's palace. And so, since we've covered all those in pretty, I think, solid detail in previous episodes, I'm going to focus on a couple of ones that we haven't dug into just as deeply or haven't touched on fairly recently that I think indicate, or we didn't examine them in the way that it would indicate us what we could learn about Thor. Mm-hmm. So, first, DJ, do you remember the poem All Wise's Sayings?
No.
So, this is the poem where the dwarf, Alvise, rolls up and tells Thor that he's going to marry his daughter. And this is the one that is so ugly.
Oh, yeah, he kicks him.
Yeah. No, he just kicks this nameless dwarf into Baldur's funeral pyre.
That's
Or
what
maybe that dwarf does have a name? This is a different
He
guy.
kicks a different dwarf.
Yeah, Thor sees him and says, "The image of an ogre you seem to me. You were not born for a bride."
Face only a mother could love.
Yeah. And so he says, like, Alvius is saying that I'm going to marry your daughter. And Thor says to him,
No?
he says like, basically like, let no man break people's sworn pledges. I shall break them then, since I've most authority over the bride as her father. I wasn't home when she was promised to you, the only one among the gods who can give this gift.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so
get it.
Thor basically is like, okay, well, you're going to have to, if you want to marry my daughter, you need to prove you're worthy of her. And this poem also, like, operates as a kind of one of those wisdom poems, right? Where it's like, hey, Thor questions him, and this, Alvius gives his information. But unlike in like Grimnir sayings, which gives us a lot of like mythological context, we don't learn anything about the gods or their adventures or their stories or things like that, because Alvius is just spitting out like how good he is at poems. Like, we get a lot of keenings, we learn a lot of words for other things.
Okay.
But it's just a lot of poetic synonyms that this dwarf has on hand. But it all turns out to be like just a ruse.
Of course it is.
Thor is stalling for time.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
In one breast I've never seen more ancient knowledge. With much guile I declared, I've beguiled you. Day dawns on you now, dwarf, and now shines into the hall. So Thor was really just stalling till the sun came up, turned to this dwarf to stone, and that's problem solved.
Oh, wow, crazy. Anyway.
Now this trickery might indicate that Thor, like, being clever, but this seems to be an isolated incident. Thor does not tip it. The fact that Thor didn't just hit him with Mjolnir is shocking. I think this must be a comedic poem.
Yeah.
Usually, quick thinking is not a common attribute we're going to see in the god of thunder and lightning, as seen in another poem called Harbard's Song. Now, in this one, Thor encounters a ferryman who refuses to give him a ride across the water. And now they go back and forth in a fighting, essentially boasting of their own personal, like, manly accomplishments while simultaneously insulting the other person.
Yeah.
In this, the ferryman is believed to be Odin in disguise. I saw some scholarship early would take it. There was a period of time where it was like, hey, maybe it's Loki, because he says some things that are similar to things Loki says in other places. But this isn't usually Loki's MO.
Yeah.
And now why would Odin do this? I don't know. How do we know it's Odin? I don't know, honestly. There's a lot of poems that just start with saying, and this is Odin in disguise, and the actual text we have
doesn't signify that.
So I don't know how those scholars know. There's probably some pattern. I'll figure it out for the Odin episode. I'll do my best. But it notes that in the introduction for this poem in Caroline Larrington's translation, she notes that it really shouldn't be a contest at all. Like, Thor inarguably has way more feats of valor and strength just from what he does, all these adventures.
Yeah.
But such is Odin's use of strategy and rhetoric, and so slow-witted is Thor, that Odin emerges a clear winner despite the obvious advantages Thor has in strength and courage in battling against giants. This is kind of viewed to be a potentially like a parody of fighting.
Yeah.
Things, because it's
like
so
it wasn't
weird.
even the same weight class. It was ridiculous.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. The way they talk to each other is weirdly conversational compared to other fighting poems. The meter is different. There's a line towards the end where it is said, Odin owns the nobles who fall in battle, and Thor owns the race of thralls, establishing a difference between the cults of the two deities, or, as Carol Clover has suggested, the poem may be intended as a parody of the usual fighting poem. Now, the thing about this is, as they go back and forth and, like, boast about their great accomplishments, we don't have those accounts in other places.
Damn.
So it's a lot of, well, this happened. Well, I fought this. Thor killed a bunch of Jotun in the east. Also a bunch of women at one point in time. But he insists those were barely women. They don't count. And I'm like, I don't need to dig into this. This is bumming. What the fuck? I'm gonna, nope. But So either they were things invented for this poem, or potentially, like, obviously would have an oral tradition, so the other accounts, wherever these stories are being referenced, we just don't have them anymore. That's pretty par for the course. But
pretty standard for Norse mythology.
Pretty standard for Norse mythology. But this poem actually includes, in the Poetic Edda, the first mention of Thor's wife, Sif, as they're insulting each other back and forth. Thor said, "Your glibness with words will bring evil upon you. If I decide to wait over the sound, louder than the wolf I think you howl, if you'll get a blow from my hammer." Hardbard said, "Sif has a lover at home. He's the one you want to meet. That is the test of strength you ought to attempt. That's more pressing for you."
Your wife's cheating on you, bro.
Basically. Thor said, "You say just what comes to your mouth so that it seems the worst to me. Coward, I think you're lying." Since we brought up Sif, let's talk about Sif a little bit.
Okay.
DJ, what do you remember about Sif, Thor's wife from the Magnus Chase books?
She makes trophies with her hair.
She makes trophies with her hair.
She's very attractive.
Yes, very pretty.
She's very fashionable.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. I talked a lot about how I didn't super love the interaction that Sif and Alex and Samira have initially. I think it works eventually when overall, but the reoccurring habit of the female characters not liking the goddesses and like Hearthstone, Blitz, and Magnus are all like charmed by them instantly, and even the goddess is like very dismissive of Alex and Samira from the jump. I've already talked about how I don't love that. I don't need to get into that again. But we find out, so Sif, they're running from Jotunheim, because of course they are. Yeah. This is right after Utgard Loki's castle. The things have broken real bad. Sif opens a door for them and brings them into Thor's hall and is like, "Hey, I've been watching you." And they're like, "How the hell are you doing that? That's real shady." And she says, "As I said, I'm Thor's wife. That's all most people know about me, sadly, but I'm also the goddess of the earth. It is a simple matter for me to track your movements across the 9 realms whenever you pass through a forest or tread on the living grass or moss." "Moss?" I said. "Yes, my dear. There is even a moss called Sif's hair, named after my luxurious golden locks." Anyway, right after this, or right before this, she talks about how she's always liked Frey because he's quite handsome. She fluffed her hair. Somehow I got the feeling that by handsome, Sif meant likely to make my husband jealous. And later on, we mentioned her son, Uller, who made the first bow and the first skins from rowan wood. I was so proud. Oh, yeah. Otis mentioned something about Uller. I didn't know he was Thor's son. Sif put a finger to her lips. "Actually, Uller is my son by my first husband. Thor's a little sensitive about it. This is a fact that seemed to please her." So just piling on to the, like... Those
just a bit of toxicity.
Yeah, those are some weird Aphrodite-esque character choices of the goddess being happy that her husband is jealous and wanting to make him jealous.
She likes the feeling of being wanted.
Yeah. Would it surprise you to hear that that doesn't seem to come from anything in the Eddas?
Not particularly.
Yeah. That's why I'm like, that, like I said, that feels like a very Aphrodite trait, who often wanted to make her lovers jealous.
Yeah.
And that was a pretty standard practice. Not really for Sif, except for the implication that she was cheating on Thor. Which apparently it sounds like for Riordan, he's taking that as being, yeah, that definitely happened. If we've decided that Sif's main personality trait is she wants to make Thor jealous.
I don't know. It could be one of those situations where they'd never cheat, but they just like the fact that their boyfriend is like a jealous boyfriend.
Yeah, which again, reads as a very Aphrodite-Ares relationship.
Oh, yeah.
Doesn't really track in terms of
Sif and Thor
as they're presented in the Eddas. For Snorri, when Sif has a comment of like, "Oh, most people don't really know anything about me beyond the fact that I'm Thor's wife." Yeah, that's pretty much the case. Like even Snorri, he doesn't mention her in the chapter where he talks about Thor. Like he talks this whole thing about Thor, who is like Thor of the Aesir, Thor the Charioteer, strongest of all gods and men, where he rules his palace. his goats, his treasure. But Sif isn't mentioned here, and she's not mentioned in the chapters about like the goddesses and stuff, and she doesn't have her own chapter. She's mentioned in this chapter about Ul. Ul is the name of one, the son of Sif. He is the stepson of Thor. He is so skillful a bowman and a skier that no one can compete with him. He is beautiful to look at and is an accomplished warrior. He's also a good person to pray to when in single combat. Which is all very nice and well and good. Now, who is his father? Not a clue.
Who knows?
It's never mentioned.
Hate to see it.
Theorize, maybe it's Njorn, maybe it's Frey.
Who knows?
Who the fuck knows? I don't. No one does. And that's the other. And then the other time Sif is mentioned by Snorri is there's a mention of a feast that all the gods are at, and Sif is stated by name as being in attendance there. Now, DJ, we talk about Sif's golden hair. Do you remember what's the deal with the hair?
She uses it to make trophies.
She does. You've said that 3 times.
Because that's kind of all I know about it.
That's all you. Okay, that's all you can remember. Okay, that's
like,
fair.
I assume it's made out of like real gold or some shit like that. She lost it all at one point, and this was a reward for something.
Okay. In addition to making trophies, she also makes a new grout for Alex.
Oh yeah. Which
again, I love where the Sif thing eventually goes, and it kind of indicates that they were judging her too harshly initially, and just. Yeah, when I like it. But so she's like, yeah, it's unbreakable. And it's best of all, not made by your father. So I love that. Speaking of Loki, he cut off all Sif's hair.
That's what it was.
This is in the Snorri's Skaldum Skamparl. And it's chapter 5. The dwarves make treasures for the gods. Why is gold called Sif's hair? As a prank, Loki, son of Laufey, cut off all Sif's hair.
Nice.
Okay, man, you could call that a prank. Definitely sounds like some sort of internet
prank.
dude. It's a prank, bro. It was just a prank.
It's a prank.
When Thor learned this, he grabbed hold of Loki and would have broken every bone in his body had Loki not sworn to find a way to get the dark elves to make hair from gold for Sif, which would grow like any other hair. And this we talked about in the dwarf episode. This is the account where Loki gets these two factions of dwarf brothers to compete in a contest of making craftsmanship, saying that they will get to cut off his head if the other ones win.
Nice.
And then gets out of it by being like, yeah, you won, but you'd have to damage my neck, and that wasn't part of the deal. So they stitch his fucking mouth shut.
You bastard. Fuck you.
So this story is fascinating because did you remember any of the objects that the gods get from this encounter?
Is there a duck in there?
There's not a duck in there. Unfortunately, that was a Riordan invention.
Yeah. No, I don't.
So it includes such things as Frey's ship, Odin's spear, and just a little thing, Thor's hammer Mjolnir.
That's outstanding. Love to see it.
It's wild. The scholar John Lindau draws attention to the fact that the need to replace Sif's hair in this story is what directly leads to the most powerful artifacts of the gods.
Literally.
And it's kind of could be interpreted as to say, like, the importance of her hair. Because they do make her hair. They make her this, like, beautiful golden hair that grows and acts just like real hair. And it's, like, just this headpiece she puts on. And it's like, your hair would grow back eventually, though, Sif, right? What
yeah,
do
but
you
gold.
do? It is way better now, gold. I just assumed that her hair does grow back eventually, but she just, wears her golden headpiece over it, obviously.
Nice.
Now, fair-haired deity was, like, a keening for Sif. And this element of her hair being golden has led to scholars viewing it as an element that could be interpreted her overall role in Norse mythology, specifically identifying her as a fertility goddess.
Nice.
19th century scholar Jacob Grimm, yes, that one, suggested that her golden hair is something that would be connected to fields of wheat, likening her to the Roman goddess Ceres.
Ooh, nice.
This is interpretation another scholar, Hilda Ellis Davidson, shares, saying, quote, The cult of Thor was linked up with men's habitation and possessions and with the well-being of family and community. This included the fruitfulness of the fields, and Thor, although pictured primarily as a storm god in the myths, was concerned with fertility and the preservation of the seasonal round. Thor's marriage with Sif of the golden hair, of which we hear little about in the myths, seems to be a memory of the ancient symbol of the divine marriage between the sky god and the earth goddess. And when he comes to the earth in the thunderstorm and the storm which brings the rains and makes the fields fertile.
Nice.
Now, I do want to note that not all scholars are totally sold on this interpretation of Sif. Rudolf Simic, who's offered an etymological interpretation of Sif's name as being, quote, relation by marriage, has suggested that she came about as more of a complement to Thor's already established fertility association, and he rejects any sort of like vegetation interpretation of the goddess whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, Simic goes so far as to say that Snorri invented the Loki prank aspect just to like write this story explaining attributes of the god. So like, why does Sif have golden hair? Oh, well, it's because Loki did this prank and that resulted in the ship, the spear, the hammer, and all these other things.
Outstanding.
And that element.
Shout out to Snorri.
And shout out to Snorri. Now, the other time Sif shows up in the Poetic Edda is in, speaking of Loki being a little fucking shit, Loki Squirrel, or the Loki Center. And we know this one. This is where Loki's just rolled up to a party. It is being the biggest asshole.
Yeah, you're like, why are you doing this, dude? This isn't cool. This isn't like you.
Yeah.
Are you feeling all right?
Yep. Now
You're a bit of a jackass, but you're not this.
Yep. Now he's just insulted Scotty, implying that they slept together.
Yeah.
Then Sif went forward and poured out mead for Loki into a crystal goblet and said, "Welcome now, Loki, and take the crystal goblet full of ancient mead. You should rather admit of the Aesir's children that Sif alone is blameless." He took the horn and drank it down. "You would be the only one if we're so. We're cautious and reluctant with a man. I know one, and I think I do now, a lover besides Thor, and that was the malevolent Loki."
It's like, I slept with you too, bitch.
Yeah, it's like his one go-to is that either I slept with you or you slept with your brother.
Yeah.
And that's his like go-to insult for the goddesses. And it's like, I feel like we're just like not putting a lot of creative energy into
certainly
this.
Not.
This instance is interesting for a couple reasons. One, what Sif does here is actually very familiar, very similar to what the queen in Beowulf does early in the poem. Holdgar's wife, Welyn, though, moves through the halls serving mead to warriors and helps diffuse conflict. Like that gives an instant that is something in Beowulf, which is like the earliest known English literature. If, dear listeners, you weren't aware of this, Beowulf is a really big deal. It is, or Germanic literature, to be specific. It demonstrates the role of the wife in this society, and not to be a silent piece in the back, but how she has an active role as peacemaker in the king's hall. And so Sif's also demonstrating this kind of function indicates a longer tradition of that, especially with her name often interpreted as like family, or as Simic demonstrated with his interpretation. And this is kind of cool and could indicate that that was what Sif was attempting to do here by like serving Loki, is that she wasn't like being like, oh, well, it's just a joke, everyone don't make it. Like, she's actively trying to diffuse everything and calm things down. But Loki's just the biggest shit.
He's just a jerk.
He's just a jerk. Another thing we have, as I said, this instance in this poem and the other one in the Harbard's song poem are the only two times Sif is mentioned, and both times it is to accuse her of being unfaithful.
Yeah.
And the first time Thor is outright being like, I think you're lying.
You're wrong. I know she's not.
And this time Sif doesn't respond. And so the scholar, it goes back to that thing I've said about like, sometimes scholars will just decide that Loki must be telling the truth here.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. He's probably just being an asshole. So Caroline Larrington again notes that like nowhere else is it attested that Sif is unfaithful. Yeah.
Though, considering the idea that like Loki cut off all her hair, she does suggest that maybe this accusation that Loki's making explains how we got close enough to carry Well, I don't like how I said that. So this accusation, Larrington said, quote, how he got close enough to carry out what might... How he got close enough to carry this out might be explained. Okay, I'm sorry. The way I set up this statement does not allow me to read this quote. So basically she says that maybe he was able to cut off her hair because they did hook up. That's essentially Larrington's statement here.
Or it's like Loki and he goes invisible and does things.
Yeah, or he's like shady as hell and disguises himself. Or...
Yeah, like there's
like
several ways of he could have gotten close.
Yeah,
to
and
this
also
person.
if it's like a Snorri thing, maybe it's Snorri inventing this. So
yeah.
Now, as I said, Sif herself does not respond to this accusation. She doesn't have to, because 3 verses later, Thor shows up. And he's ready to beat Loki's ass, specifically threatening him with Mjolnir. Thor then arrived and said, be silent, perverse creature. My mighty hammer Mjolnir shall deprive you of speech. Your shoulder rock I shall strike off your neck, and then your life shall be gone. And that line, Mjolnir shall deprive you of speech, is reprised in every subsequent verse that Thor is in like threatening Loki with. And Loki finally leaves, hiding himself in a waterfall. And everything else happens after that.
Yeah.
And that felt like a great time to talk about Mjolnir. Because
it's a special hammer.
It's a special hammer. Now, the name for Thor's hammer, or the etymological origins for it, is a matter of debate. Scholars have ranged from interpreting it as meaning lightning, or the color white, or the grinder.
Mm-hmm.
So, who's to say, really? There's a lot of options. But we know it's important. Snorri himself notes that Thor has 3 choice possessions. One is the hammer Mjolnir. Frost giants and mountain giants recognize it when it is raised in the air, which is not surprising as it has cracked many a skull among their fathers and kinsmen. His second great treasure is Megangard, Belt of Strength. When he buckles it on, his divine strength doubles. His third possession, the Gloves of Iron, are also a great treasure. He cannot be without these when he grips the hammer's shaft. So
he needs his strength gloves.
He needs it. Just
strong gloves.
Strong gloves.
Tear his hands right off if you don't have them.
Yoink. The notion of Mjolnir as only Thor can lift it isn't necessarily the Marvel if he be worthy.
Yeah,
thing.
it's so fucking heavy.
It's so
and
fucking
he's
heavy.
the strongest fella, and even then,
he
has to have his iron gloves.
He has to have the gloves, and it sounds like maybe the belt too.
Yeah.
To double his strength, and also
he's really just a weightlifter guy. He's got his fucking weightlifting belt, and he's got his lifting gloves on. He's ready.
Mm-hmm. Now, Mjolnir is most often mentioned when Thor is fighting, as indicated when he threatens Loki with it like 7 times at the end of the poem. But it might also be how Thor's goats are resurrected. Now, you mentioned the goats earlier?
Yeah.
And they die.
Eats them every night, and every morning they come back. All the flesh comes back.
Yep.
The bones don't heal, so he doesn't break them.
Yep.
Because of that reason, they don't heal overnight.
Mm-hmm.
So he would actually have to let his goat live for a while in order to let it heal proper.
Yep. And that story comes from the Gylfaginning from Snorri. It talks about how Loki and Thor were traveling together and ended up stopping at a farmhouse and arranged for lodging over the night. And Thor slaughters the goats and prepares them to eat, and he invites the farmer and his family to dine with him. And he instructs the household should throw the bones on the skin. Thalfi, the farmer's son, took the thigh bone of one of the goats and, wedging in his knife, broke the bone to reach out the marrow. Thor stayed the night, and just before dawn he got up and dressed. He reached for his hammer Mjolnir and, lifting it up, consecrated the goat skins. The goats stood up, but one of them was lame in its hind leg. Thor noticed this and suspected that the farmer or one of his household had mistreated the goat's bones. They come out, and Thor is pissed. He is so angry. Thor's hand clenched the shaft of the hammer until the knuckles whitened. As might be expected, the farmer and all his household began to wail. Begging for mercy, they offered returned everything they owned. When Thor saw their fear, his anger passed. Calming down, he took from them their children, Thalfal and Roskva, as compensation. They became Thor's bondservants and followed him ever since.
Yep.
Yeah.
They were with him when he went to Utgard Loki's.
They were?
Yeah.
Oh, crazy.
One of them competed in the contest, the male.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's
he did
neat.
not the eating, the running, I believe.
The running run, yeah. So that, I like the, one, it's Mjolnir's, are the goats magic, or is Thor and Mjolnir magic?
Who knows?
Who knows?
A mix of both, maybe? I don't know.
Maybe. Skemmick has actually likened Thor's goats to the beast of Valhalla that they eat again and again. So it might just be an extension of that myth. This one does kind of make it sound like it's Thor just bringing the goats back to life as like an effort, which would imply that in sort of summer when they eat the goats, Thor shouldn't be able just to bring them back the next day. Clearly, so Riordan is clearly presenting a version where the goats themselves are magic and come back, and not Thor is the one who has to bring them back with the hammer. Fun fact about the goats. They are only given names in this story by Snorri.
Hell yeah.
It was mentioned in the Gylfaginning.
We get a goat name, but we don't get the eagle name.
We don't get the eagle name. Well, Snorri didn't bother to invent that, but he invented some goat names because while they are referenced in the Poetic Edda, specifically when it mentions the goat having one of its hind legs being injured, it cites Loki as being responsible for it, but says that you're already familiar with that tale.
Okay.
Meanwhile, over here, it just sounds like this kid, however old he was, just did this of his own accord, and Loki had actually nothing to do with this one. Did not tell him to do it or anything.
Okay.
So, as I said, there are a couple examples of, hey, we think Snorri made this up. The scholars think that Snorri made up the names of the goats. Mjolnir, as the symbol of Thor, goes... how do I want to word this? It is the symbol of Thor.
Yeah.
To the point where... how I said at the top, talking about Thor as this like representative of humanity, which I think, a protector of humanity, which I think is something that this goat story actually indicates. He's super angry about what has happened with his goats, but when he realizes how afraid the family is of him, he does draw it back. He's angry, but he doesn't want them to fear and cower before him, right?
Yeah.
Not like he would want the giants to do so, and he would have just killed all the giants for such an indiscretion.
Easy. He would have tossed them.
Here, the children just have to become his servants, which sounds like probably was just standard cultural practice. So, and it sounded fine. Like you said, he's the son's showing up doing fun quests with Thor. So they're
chilling.
Clearly well cared for. In addition to like further evidence we have of Thor as this important figure for everyday folks of the Norse era is the fact that over 1,000 pendants in the like distinct shape that is interpreted as being Thor's hammer have been found in the Nordic countries, as well as England, Northern Germany, Baltic countries, and Russia.
Nice.
And
Thor was big. People liked Thor.
People liked Thor. Like, this was a symbol that they held close for his like protection and strength, right? I mentioned how in the Viking era, all of a sudden, like, folks were naming their kids like conjugates of Thor's name, and how like Semic believed like, hey, that was probably a response to the Christianization. The wearing of the Thor's Mjolnir, the wearing of Mjolnir as an amulet also was popularized around the same time and was probably also doing a same thing, is like kind of trying to push it back against this.
Yeah.
And that just, again, also underlines the importance of Thor. The last thing we have that I want to talk about is the fate of Mjolnir. Because as we know, Thor dies fighting the World Serpent. Or he's slaying the World Serpent. He dies after he battles it. But that's not the end of Mjolnir.
Mm-hmm.
In the poem Vafnir's Sayings, it is Odin, once again disguised, asks what becomes of like all of the gods' weapons after the fires of Surt go out. Like after Ragnarok, excuse me. Vafnir said, Vidar and Vali will live in the gods' sanctuaries where Surt's fire is slacked. Modi and Magni shall have Mjolnir and demonstrate battle strength. And so we have the thing Rick Riordan mentions on the Knuckles, his 2 sons that survive Ragnarok, 4 sons. Now, here's a fun fact. Modi means wrath. Magi means mighty.
Nice.
Simic, who's just been a real big player in this episode, has also noted that Thor's daughter, her name is Third, her name means strength. And the three of them embody their father's main attributes.
Wonderful. Outstanding. Big fan.
Big fan. Third may actually be that daughter that Alvis wanted to marry. She isn't named in the poem, but she is the one named daughter we have of Thor.
Shout out.
One of Odin's Valkyries that we have in list also named Third. So that is it the meaning strength? Is it the same? No, maybe. I don't know. Perhaps. I'd like to think so.
That's from mommy, bro.
What?
What?
Okay, last thing I have. In the Skalskapam, Snorri notes that Third's mother is Sif, while he says that Magi's mother is a Jotun named Jarnsaksa. Now, Modi's mother is never mentioned. Now, since we're talking about Thor and talking about Mjolnir specifically, I know DJ's like, I'm so tired. I promise.
No. I just Thor was during that fishing trip. He had an urge and he just busted one out and it went into the ocean. That's where Modi comes from.
That's a little too Greek mythology, DJ. Bring it back in. You're pulling a Rick Riordan here.
It's funny.
So, talking about Thor, we're talking about Mjolnir, and obviously, it would be incomplete not to acknowledge the poem where Mjolnir perhaps plays the most prominent role. That time it gets snagged by the frost giants, and Thor's got to go and drag to get it back.
Bastards.
Now, unlike Riordan's claim suggesting that this seems to happen often, because Sam says, did it get stolen again? And Thor's like, not once, not twice, 3 times if you count this, but you shouldn't count this because it didn't really happen. That is like the only time it's really ever happened.
It's not even like he lost it. Somebody stole it.
Yeah. It's the one poem, the one instance where that's not mentioned any other. It's not like he loses it all the time. It's this one time. So it is perplexing for it to be like, this happened all the time. But I would like to save getting into that poem for our next episode.
Okay. With Loki?
With Loki. Yeah, spoilers, y'all. It's the Loki episode.
Loki.
Y'all been waiting for it. Double spoilers, y'all. Robert Gamer's going to be on the episode.
Woo.
Here we go. We got a guest episode. Finally, we've arranged it. TJ and I have the same day off coming up soon, in which our guest can record. So, hooray.
Wonderful.
So, DJ, do you want to tell us about Thor and Marvel Rivals?
He's a tank. They call them vanguards in that game.
Huh.
He uses Thor Force, which is his own resource that's just like hammers that like take 2 seconds to charge. He can either throw his hammer, swing his hammer and like dash with his hammer, very short distance, or if he's got 3, he can become like Mighty Thor for a bit and throw out like electric from his hands.
Nice.
Pretty fun. His ult is he flies up in the air and he slams down. He's not the worst tank to deal with.
Oh, okay. Who's the worst tank to deal with?
Penny Parker.
Ooh, okay.
Or Venom.
Or Venom.
Both are very annoying. Both have a ton of futility in their kit, and I don't like it.
DJ, would you like to now tell us about Thor and Smite?
Let me pull up his lore.
While we're still on the Marvel, okay, so Thor obviously exists in the Marvel comics. It's a big deal. I'm not going to go into the modern stuff on Thor. Like, there's a lot. Honestly, go read the run of the Mighty Thor where Jane Foster was Thor. That was super fun and really neat. But I want to just real briefly talk about the origin of Thor from Marvel Comics. Not whatever the current canonical, like, retcon version of his history is. Like, I want to talk a little bit about the first time the character showed up in Marvel Comics. And it was August 1962 in Journey into Mystery number 83. Written by Stan Lee, artist Jack Kirby.
Classic.
Now we've introduced Dr. Donald Blake. He's vacationing in Norway. He encounters an invasion force of the Stonemen of Saturn. He runs, hides in a cave, finds a cane, grabs it, and then finds himself transformed into the Thunder God Thor, the cane becoming Mjolnir. It's like
That's insane.
Little bit of a King Arthur type, but fully transforms him. The inscription on Mjolnir is where we get the "Whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor."
That's outstanding.
Yep. As Thor,
Wonderful.
Donald Blake can fly and control the elements and be super strong. Now, it's Mjolnir would obviously magically come back to his hand, but if it was out of his grasp for more than 1 minute, he would transform back into his civilian identity. This comic was not consistent. They just didn't have a lot of time to dedicate to it. He would reappear a little bit later, having moved back to New York and set up a practice with a young nurse named Jane Foster, who he immediately fell in love with, although Foster was not aware of Blake's alter ego because Odin, Thor's father, made it let him know it was strictly forbidden for him to ever tell him anything about this.
Hate to see it.
In time, by specifically the 70s, they would retcon the entire Dr. Donald Blake wielding Mjolnir as they basically established, no, he was Thor the whole
He just
time.
forgot.
He just forgot he was being punished by Odin and sent to Earth.
Awesome.
And that's roughly what we got in the movie, and that's where we've gotten to this day. I just wanted to share that because it is super wild and funny, and also there was a early what if comic where what if Jane Foster had been the one to find the cane and became Thor, and that's how I knew about that, and that's how I fucking called it was Jane Foster when they first did the first 10 issues of the Mighty Thor run. The readers don't know her identity. We don't know who it is. There's a lot of theorizing about it, but I was like, it's fucking Jane Foster. We've done this already.
Yeah, we know. It's obvious.
But yeah, I wanted to share that because isn't that comics are great?
No, it's wonderful. Big fan. Thor, as famous as he is bold, is the god of the thundering sky. Yet his hammer, Mjolnir, is nearly as famous as he is, and Thor will not be parted from it. Odin, the Allfather, bore many children, but none as well known nor as mighty as Thor, who had the strength to move mountains and the power to call lightning from the sky. Mm-hmm. Despite these incredible gifts, Thor's enemies were cunning, bloodthirsty, and numerous. The frost giants constantly threatened to invade Asgard, requiring every ounce of Thor's near limitless strength just to keep them at bay. Had the tide truly turned, Asgard might have been destroyed, but a simple prank played by the treacherous Loki ended with the creation of Mjolnir, the legendary hammer, and with it, Thor utterly crushed the frost giants. Sif, Thor's wife, had hair like rays of sun through a cloudy sky, and Loki, being covetous, secretly sheared it off while she slept. Mad with fury, Thor demanded Loki fix this, so Loki went to the dwarves of Ivaldi, who forged a golden crown that would grow equally golden hair, a spear that never missed its mark, and a ship that would never sink. Proud of his treasures, Loki returned to Thor and the other gods, gave the crown to Sif, then bragged that no greater items could be forged. The dwarf Brock took offense to this and claimed that he and his brother could do better. Loki bet his head they could not, so Brock and his brother forged 3 items: a ring that made a duplicate every 9 days, a golden pig that could fly and swim, and the hammer Mjolnir, with the power to shatter mountains. As each item was forged, Brock was bitten fiercely by a fly, yet only on the 3rd one did he flinch, causing the short handle on the hammer. When they were done, the dwarves took their artifacts before the gods, and he decried Loki's fly disguise. All the gods agree that Brock and his brother had forged greater items. Loki, ever cunning, declared his neck was not part of the bargain, denying them his head. Mjolnir went to Thor to battle the frost giants. Proud and mighty, Thor beat back the evil horde and continues to defend Asgard this day. With Mjolnir in hand, Thor is an unstoppable force. Even other gods would do well to avoid.
So that one definitely just felt like someone really likes the Loki
He is one of the
story.
very first gods in Smite.
Okay,
I think he was part of closed
the original,
beta.
yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was like, we spent a lot of time talking about a story that Thor is not involved in.
Not particularly involved, no. But
he's tangentially involved in it. I think we could have gone without having to. We could just been like, oh, because he was like, I'll get it fixed. He went to the dwarves, and as the result, Mjolnir was one of the magical artifacts created. But no, we told the whole story,
thing,
including the bet and the neck loophole. I'm like, that's great. I think it's just someone who's like, I really like this story, and I want more people to know about it because it's so funny.
Yeah. He started off as a warrior, but through his kit, they realized, no, we actually made him an assassin. So
Whoa, what?
He was an assassin.
That seems crazy.
Yeah, it's because he was crazy mobile and did a ton of damage super quick.
Yeah?
So it was easier to make him less tanky than it was to try to change his kit.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah, he can throw his hammer and teleport to it while it's mid-throw.
Mm-hmm.
He can slam down on the ground, causing like a small wall, and anybody gets stunned if they get hit by it. He spins, smacking people with his hammer. So
Nice.
hurts. And then his ult is he flies up into the sky, and he can, like, a pretty good range slam down and stun a lot of people.
Do you have a favorite Thor skin?
Ragnarok Force X. It's so...
What is it called?
Ragnarok Force X.
Ragnarok Force X.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Let me
That's not what I heard.
find it. It changes mid-game.
Well, that's fun.
Oh, yeah. So it starts off, and he's the pilot of a mech.
Neat.
And when you ult, he gets it Iron Man style put onto his body and slams down, and he's in that.
That's really fun.
It's awesome. Big fan.
That's pretty tight.
I spent too much money on it.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, it was one of those like ending Odyssey event skins. Granted, sure, I got everything in the event along with it, but I spent money poorly trying to get it.
Oh,
and I
no.
ended up like doubling how much I had to spend to actually get it. So, yeah, hate to see it. But fantastic skin, very good. He does have the a Valkyrie's Bride skin where he's in the wedding dress.
Oh, that's very good.
Yeah, very fun.
That's good. I think mechs and Thor. Marvel What If Season 3 just did a mech episode.
That's right. You were sending me
It was really fun.
some things on it. It was crazy.
That was the thing I was sending you on were totally different episodes.
There was a kaiju fight in that episode.
There was I did send you the kaiju fight, I think.
Yeah,
that
there was a
pretty
kaiju
fun.
fight in
And
that episode.
of the 4 I watched last night, that episode was the least crazy.
That's nuts.
That was the least crazy.
It's the one you sent me the most on.
No, the one I sent you the most
Dude.
of was where Darcy Lewis and Howard the Duck got married and had a kid.
It all looked the exact same.
Well, of
towards
course
the
it does.
end
It's
there.
all
I'm
the
like,
art.
Oh my god.
No, Marvel What If Season 3 is great. I highly recommend. Marvel What If is so fun.
It's a blast. I remember watching the first season. I'm like, this is good.
First season is really good.
Never went back to it, but
No, but yeah, there's a mech episode. All the original Avengers die. So the episode is actually following Sam Wilson as Captain America and also Monica Rambeau as Spectre, Nakia she's Black Panther's girlfriend.
Wonderful.
Shang-Chi is in it, and Moon Knight. And they all have their own mechs.
That's wonderful.
And they have to fight Gamma Beasts. And it was really
That's
fun.
absolutely insane. Jesus Christ.
So, yeah, big fan. Oh, this episode about? This episode was about Thor.
Yep.
It was, yeah, Thor's pretty good. Sif's pretty good. I think I don't like Rick Riordan's Magnus Chase books. Like I do.
Yeah,
like
but now you started to relate it to like actual Norse mythology. Like, wow, oh, okay.
I don't.
Choices.
Yes, that's what it is. I still like it. The end of Ship of the Dead is still
Very
my
good.
favorite ending. And so I like all of the original character stuff that Rick Riordan does. But I'm starting to feel more and more that I don't like the choices he made in adapting the material. And that is not me going against the central thesis of this podcast, saying that these choices were wrong or that it is bad because it is different.
You just didn't like him.
I'm allowed to not like him.
Yeah.
And that does
Absolutely.
not negate the central thesis of the podcast. I'm not saying you have to like all variations of a myth.
Absolutely not.
I'm just saying them being different doesn't necessarily make it bad. In fact, the differences do ultimately serve the narrative that Rick Riordan is trying to tell.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. We'll be back in your ears on Tuesday, January the 14th to talk about Loki.
Loki, woo!
Let's do it!
Thank you guys for joining us, and until next time,
Don't be like Zeus.
don't be like Zeus.
Muses of Mythology is created and hosted by Darien and DJ Smartt. It's edited by Darien Smartt. The show is produced by Darien and DJ Smartt, as well as
Tim O'Connor, The Crystal Con Man, Nicholas Miller. Our music is Athens Festival by Martin Hain, and our cover art is by Audrey Miller. You can find her on Instagram at Bombshell Nutshell Art.
Want more Muses of Mythology? Support the show on Patreon. Just $1 gets you exclusive bonus content. Get more at patreon.com/Muses of Mythology.
You can also support the show by leaving a review at lovethepodcast.com/Muses of Mythology, or tell a friend why you love the show.
Don't forget to check out all of our episodes and episode transcripts at musesofmythology.com.
Thanks for listening.